You're listening to Raceway Ministries Today. Thanks for joining us for Raceway Ministries Today. In just a few moments, we're going to give you the latest of what's going on in motorsports outreach through the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. Well, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Raceway Ministries Today. We're very, very privileged today to be able to come to you and to share some ideas and some thoughts about what is going on in the world of outreach through the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. My name is Roger Marsh. I am currently serving as the interim executive director for the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. And today, all the way from Virginia, we have Michael Harrison on the line. Michael has served us as a part of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministry Board of Directors for many years, currently involved in pastoral ministry at the Community Fellowship in Collinsville, Virginia. If you want to look them up and take a look at all the creative things that they do there at the Community Fellowship, you can go to their website. It's thecommunityfellowship.org. We have some great, valuable input from Michael Harrison from his perspective as a pastor and also his input to our board of directors and his work with Raceway Ministries through not only NFRM but also Raceway Ministries Martinsville through the years. And so we're excited to have Michael on with us today. Michael, greetings and welcome to you. How are things up in Virginia?
Things in Virginia are well today. Mostly well because the Sooners won yesterday, and I'm from Oklahoma originally, brother. I've got to get that in, but things are good.
Man, yeah.
It's a beautiful day in Virginia, brother.
Well, good. I had a chance to tune in to that Sooners game against the Gators last night, and I'll be honest with you, when it got to 54-17, I think it was, I tuned out and went to bed. They were looking pretty good, I have to admit. The Sooners, they seem to have it together, so congratulations to you and apparently your team. How are you and Julie doing? Did y'all have a good Christmas?
We did. We were able to spend time with my family in Oklahoma with my dad and
good.
Mom and my brothers. And, you know, the travel back and forth can be a little stressful, and our girls are both grown and moved out, so it was just our son, who's a senior in high school, and us, but it was good.
Well, congratulations to you and your family for having a great holiday season, and to you and all the weddings that you've had here recently. I've kind of followed that on Facebook, and so congratulations to you all for some great markers along the way in life with you and your family. I have great memories of some of the times that we spent together, not only up there in Martinsville at the Speedway, but also over in Watkins Glen. I recall one trip we had to Watkins Glen. I think about Ryan every time I walk out to my Chevy Cruze and see the dent in the door that he put there at the hotel. And I use that as a reminder to pray for him every time I see that little dent. And
that 17-year-old young man would appreciate you.
I'm sure he would. He probably would hate me telling that, but I got to tell you, those just add to the great memories that I have of spending time with you and your family, and really appreciate what God has done through you and Julie and the girls and Ryan and the whole family. You guys are great servants of the Lord.
We really appreciate you, Roger Marsh. You are an incredible friend.
Well, I appreciate that, and I treasure your friendship, always have. As we get started today, I thought one of the best ways to begin would be just to find out about your walk with the Lord. How did your life with Christ begin, Michael, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that?
Well, about 9 months before I was born, my parents had been in church forever and ever.
Okay.
You know, my father was a Sunday school director. My mom was involved in everything, and so church life was not a question mark. It was an exclamation point from the very beginning.
Yeah.
You know, there have been rocky times, and I remember as a 10-year-old, it was either 10 or 11, when my dad had a massive heart attack on a softball field, and just life began to change. Church was not something we did. It began to be something we were because of it. A relationship just began. But my mom was really the strong spiritual person. You know, I remember sitting in her lap as a kid talking about Christ and talking about his desire for us. And so, you know, then I get saved at May 10th, 1986 as 15-year-old. I started preaching about a year later and just have always been involved in church. And I'm so grateful for what God has done through His church.
Yeah.
And, now our family involved. We started the church that I'm in today 14 years ago.
Oh, it's been that long.
The time is flying.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, obviously your beginnings with Christ were with you and your family, growing up and church being a priority, the gospel being presented. How did you end up in Virginia?
I graduated from high school, went to a Christian school, and really believe that Christian school gave me a lot of opportunities for ministry that I wouldn't have had in a public school. So it was a small, there were 13 people in my graduating class.
Okay.
So, very different organization. But, I got to plan all the chapels, my senior year and all that kind of stuff. But from there, I moved to Dallas, Texas, and went to Criswell College.
Okay.
And worked for a guy named Dawson McAllister, if you remember.
Oh, yeah, very familiar with him.
Yeah, youth stuff. So I did that and did ministry, and then went to Georgia for a summer internship, which turned into about 10 years, being at First Baptist Church of Idalia, and then several churches I pastored, and I met Julie, my wife, who's a Georgia Peach.
Okay, I didn't realize she was from Georgia.
So we spent a good bit of time there. A little bit in the middle of it, I spent about a year in Honduras working, actually living in Mississippi, but working in Honduras, then came back there, and pastoring a church, probably my fourth church or something like that, in the year 2000. Y2K had come and went, so to speak, and things seemed to be well, but it didn't end up well. The church was in turmoil. Their past came back to bite them. My youth with older leadership, you know how that goes sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Julie and I sought the Lord to leave. It's a long story. Let me try to make it short. We sought the Lord to leave. He wouldn't let us leave until about 4 months in, and then God said He released us. And the day that I resigned, a church from Bassett, Virginia, called and found my resume on the internet where I put it there like 3 years before.
Mm-hmm.
And God connected us. July the 2nd of 2001, we moved into Bassett, Virginia, Orchard Drive Baptist Church, the Orchard, the first place where you came and preached for me.
Yeah,
Roger.
I recall. I sure do.
So that's where we met, and I've been here it'll be 20 years in 2000.
My goodness. Wow. Yeah. Well, can't help but appreciate what God has done in your life, and sometimes it's a long and winding road for us as the Lord gets us where He wants us. But I got to tell you, we're very grateful that God sent you to Virginia, and I recall being there at the church and preaching for you there at Orchard Drive. And I recall just the friendliness and the encouragement that you projected even at that time. And that, of course, has spilled over into our Raceway Ministries work.
Well, Roger, let me interrupt and I want to tell you two things about my spiritual life that I don't say a lot, but they're really, really important. And that is, number one, my youth pastor intentionally discipled us boys. And there are either 12 or 15 of us in full-time ministry today because Phil Dietz, who poured into us. And then in my early 20s, I met a man through my doctor who was an OBGYN who I traveled doing mission work with. Mm-hmm. I met a man named Herb Hodges from Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis who poured his life into me, not as a pastor, but as a human walking with Jesus.
Right.
And so I'm a real stickler for pour your life into somebody else so they can walk with Jesus like you.
Oh, wow.
Again, that's where I think that you fit in, Roger, as a church historian, as a Raceway Ministries guy, and you guys have poured into me, and I need that.
Well, we all need that, and it's a mutual thing for sure. We don't walk alone with the Lord. We have to do that in partnership with other folks who are walking with us, and it's just part of the way God set up His church for us to all be gifted in different ways and to offer those spiritual gifts to others to help us all along on the journey. So, wow, what a great perspective. Appreciate you sharing that, Michael. Obviously, we're talking today about Raceway Ministries work. And we're with Michael Harrison, who is a part of our National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries Board of Directors, also pastor at the Community Fellowship in Collinsville, Virginia, and then very actively involved with the Raceway Ministries group at the Martinsville Speedway up in Virginia. How did you get hooked up in that, Michael? I recall going to Orchard Road there and preaching, and you were involved at ministry there in Martinsville. Yeah. And how did that get started?
So my dad worked for General Motors forever. So I remember Dale Sr. driving an AC Delco car.
Yeah.
And then I remember Kenny Schrader driving an AC Delco truck.
Okay.
And then I get to Martinsville, in which I didn't know, Texas, Oklahoma, we didn't have much racing at that point.
That's right.
Other than some dirt track stuff. But I get here, and the director of missions sits down with me and says, hey, you need to be involved in the association. I'm like, yeah, I've done that before. What do you want to do? Well, tell me what you got. Raceway Ministries, that sounds great. So I had been here 4 months in October of 2001 was my first race.
Oh,
and
okay.
I've only missed 2 since. One because I had pneumonia, and the other one probably because I was out of the country.
Well, we'll accept those excuses. That's no problem.
But Raceway Ministries has been part of my life since I got here. That's my answer, Roger.
Yeah, okay. Well, I know Henry County Baptist Association has been largely responsible through John Fox's efforts years ago to get involved there at Martinsville. And so obviously you becoming a Baptist pastor there in that area, the connection would be inevitable, I would suppose, but we're glad that you got involved in it. How about the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries? I know you've been partners with us and on the board of directors for many years, but how did you begin to get involved with the NFRM?
You know, I don't remember who asked me to get a part, but I do remember my first board meeting in Nashville and you as director, and I remember there needing to be a need. And at that point, I was young, as in 37, 38.
Okay.
And, you know, I knew that Raceway Ministries, we all had talked about it, needed some younger guys and us to come in. So all I remember is Eldred Davis and John Fox saying, hey, try this.
Good. Well, appreciate those guys having the foresight to be able to ask someone like you, younger, to get involved, and we appreciate you and your part in it. Now, ministry at Martinsville Speedway, I'm going to let that be a story for another day. I'll get in touch with Tim Bird, Lee Howell, some of those guys, since they're currently serving as the head of Raceway Ministries there. I'll get with them and talk more in detail about ministry there at Martinsville. But if you could, just briefly describe how that ministry has gone through the years. And then what I'd really like you to focus on for just a moment is the role of Raceway Ministries Martinsville during this unusual 2020 NASCAR season.
Well, you know, Martinsville is very intensive for us in guest services.
Yes.
You know, ISC now, I guess NASCAR has always had a presence of guest services at the track.
Dean Kurtz.
Dean Kurtz. And I remember walking with him through the track, and he said, hey, there's the church steeple. We've got to have that. So that's what we have been, is the church steeple doing worship services. We used to do concerts. We now do transportation for handicapped individuals, you know, all different kinds of things. But what the track needed for guests, we get involved.
Okay.
So ongoing, you know, we have 2 or 3 sites that we maintain. We take care of an ADA parking lot and then about 15 carts on race weekend on a normal race.
Okay.
And my prayer always, Roger, is, you know, God, let me have a gospel conversation.
Sure.
Let me talk about Jesus.
Sure.
We get them on a cart,
right,
and we have the conversation.
Well, now, going into 2020, I can't recall, but did you and the group there have a chance to have a weekend of ministry before the pandemic really began?
We did not.
Okay.
They canceled ours close to the first of the pandemic.
Okay.
Which would have been at the end of March, 1st of April, something like
exactly.
that.
Well, how did things change for Raceway Ministry Martinsville during the 2020 season?
We've had 2 races. The first one was in June or July, and actually that's one of the races that I missed.
Right.
But we got involved, you know, said to the Speedway, hey, you let us know what we can do, because there were no fans, you know, only racers and their teams and that kind of stuff. So we were tasked with assisting NASCAR with some check-in stuff. So we had about 10 or 12 people who had iPads, and we're checking folks in during that time. So that was the first race week. The second race weekend was this October, and we had the ability to have a very few number of fans,
Okay.
We ran our cart, and we became ambassadors in the stands, helping people stay social distance, reminding them to wear their masks.
Sure.
We had about 20, 25 volunteers, and had a bunch of new volunteers, because some folks just don't want to get out around people during COVID.
Oh, yeah, understandably so. Well, I know 2020 has been a very, very different kind of season for not only racing, but the ministry side of it as well. Now, the major topic that I'd like to talk about today is a transition that you made a few years ago from a traditional church, Orchard Drive, kind of transitioned into the Orchard, and then as time went by, God seemed to lead you to do something very creative and innovative to create the community fellowship. How did that change come about? What were the circumstances? What kind of motives were behind it? You know, all those details. How did that transition come about?
Well, as in church life many times, church splits happen.
Yeah.
And very honest, The Orchard had come out of a church split, and actually come out of 2 or 3 church splits in that general area, Blackberry Baptist Church and another couple up there, Fairway Baptist Church. But it was inevitable that, my leadership, my style, and we had already started doing ministry to folks that were in poverty.
Okay.
And so that really had become more of my heart, is helping people who really weren't able to help themselves, if you will.
Sure.
And so as we began to bless people, we were doing that work, and it just was not fitting with the makeup of what was there. So the church began to go through the split, and some of those people asked me to stay and start a new church. I was not amiable to that, did not want that. In fact, myself and Brother Honeycutt, if you remember him, who was our director of missions, began to look and see. We went to Seattle and my hometown of Tulsa, and I really sought the Lord to move, but he wouldn't do it. And then I had 2 confidants, or just 2 people at the Orchard, great friends, older, in their 70s, who said, Michael, we really believe that you need to listen. And neither of them helped start the new church. But both of them were extremely supportive in saying, this town needs a new breath of air. And so there weren't many non-traditional churches at that point, contemporary, if you will. And we started in August of 06. We had our first weekend service in November of 06.
Wow.
Founded on the premise of demonstrating the love of God to our community through random acts of service, so that we could win the right to talk to people about Jesus, whether you had your attention for 5 minutes, 55 minutes, or for however long.
Okay.
And that's really what we do, hungry, hurting, and homeless.
Wow. Well, obviously, what God opened up for you there was clearly a fit with your mindset, your giftedness, where your heartbeat was. So I would guess emotionally, even though there possibly was some strain in making the transition and having to break some of the relationships and go through just the dynamics of that kind of a change, there were some emotional things involved. But seems like God put together something that was perfectly suited for you at the time.
Yeah. Right. It was, really, because that's where the Lord was leading me in a direction to try new things, to be creative, to think differently about preaching, and really not differently, just to be more, I hate to say it, relevant.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I don't think the word in any place is irrelevant. But, just to speak to people who are either been hurt by the church or just don't find it very comfortable.
Sure. Well, I would agree with you. 2020 is a lot different than 2006 in terms of church styles of worship and ways of doing ministry. And as time has gone on, I certainly have been a part of traditional churches myself. I've pastored First Baptist County Seat churches, and I pastored baby boomer churches. Most recently pastored a cowboy church of all things. And, I've learned that flexibility in ministry it's a good thing. Being available to adapt and transition into different styles of ministry. Sometimes you reinvent yourself, and in the process of doing that, you do become relevant to a particular group of people within the culture, whereas maybe there wasn't anything relevant for them at one time. I would guess, and I would think you might agree with me, is that whole concept relevant for ministry in 2020 and 2021?
Oh, I do believe 100% that God has placed each of us in His work for specific places, specific times, and this is, man oh man, an opportunity, whether you feel called to folks who have major wealth or none. And, I believe that God has centered us on a guy or a girl or a family who are completely broken.
Sure.
Broken by life, broken by poverty, broken by not having them. Of course, there's brokenness all the way through, but I'm really talking about those who have nothing.
Sure.
Almost nowhere to put their head.
Well, observing some of the ministry opportunities that you guys have had there at the community, your outreach at the beginning of school years with helping kids with backpacks and supplies and just food and so many things that y'all do, I can't help but think that maybe God, even in the beginning days of the community fellowship, could look down through the corridors of time and know that this pandemic was coming and that people would be hit here in America harder than they have in a long time. And you guys have been uniquely suited to be able to step in and meet those needs with years of preparation and then relevance for the day. One thing that I would like to ask you is, what would you say to someone that maybe has been a part of traditional ways of doing ministry and they're kind of tinkering with or thinking about innovative, creative, outside-the-box ministry, and maybe they're on the fence with it and not know what to do? What would your encouragement be to them?
There's a couple of different sides of that I'd like to go at. Number one, when I was younger and even today, I began to look at the traditional church with contempt. I'll just be honest. you guys got it all wrong. You can't do anything. And God really humbled my heart when I read a quote by Dino Rizzo that said, "Don't become so exclusive that you think you're the only show in town.
Wow.
Celebrate the wins of others." So I've got a really good friend that's a Presbyterian pastor, and they do things so different.
Sure.
And then I got a Methodist buddy, and then I got First Baptist Church down here. I need to celebrate my traditional guy, okay?
Yeah.
So, because there's a place for all of us.
Yes.
But I want to tell you that in the non-traditional, I really find that there's freedom here that I never had in another place.
Oh, yeah.
Also, as a church planter, every problem that we have, well, not every, since we're 14 years old, almost every problem we've had, I created.
Right.
And I may be the problem. So, there's the dynamics. But the freedom of different music, the freedom of, a different way to do ministry, what I can wear. I mean, heck, you cowboy church guys, you can wear spurs. I can't wear spurs, but I wear jeans.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really find a real freedom in that. And then also those who are homeless who want to walk in the door, or those that don't have the right clothes or haven't had a bath, this is a place where they will find themselves welcome.
Good.
And so that's kind of non-traditional. Now, there's all different, Roger, as well as I do. There are people who like non-traditional church in every socioeconomic class or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So I think there's a place for all of those.
Good. Well, I think the things that you just described would encourage anyone that might be contemplating innovative or creative ministry to know that it's okay, and it's a great spot to be in, to be able to meet some unique needs, and maybe an opportunity for you to be who you are with the giftedness that God has given to you, and to let that shine for the gospel and really reach people. Major shift of gears here.
Okay.
I want to talk about Raceway Ministries with all of that in mind that you just described. You've been a part of NFRM work for a long time, and NFRM work, Raceway Ministries work from our national perspective, is 25 years old as we approach the year 2021. We've done things the way that we've done them for a long time. I mean, the ministry methods that we have used, some go back to the very beginnings of Raceway Ministries work. And if I were to ask you, is it time maybe for Raceway Ministries nationally and at the individual level? I'm talking about both large speedways like Texas, Martinsville, Talladega, and short tracks. Those dirt tracks and short asphalt tracks where local series run on a weekly basis. Do you think it's time for us to shift gears and maybe reinvent ourselves with some innovation and creativity? If I were to pose that question to you, what would be your response?
So, wow, that's a large question, but I want to throw it back to my history professor brother.
Okay. All right.
Wasn't there a leader early in some country that said every 10 years or so, everybody needs a revolution? I don't remember the quote, and I don't remember who it was, but I think we always need to be reinventing ourselves.
Yes.
Changing the gospel, none. Changing our activities toward it, lots.
Yes. Yes.
I remember pastoring in South Georgia and there being a cornfield across the street, and every so many years it didn't do corn because they had to rotate the crops,
sure,
make the soil. I think we need to learn that. Sometimes we need to go slow because it takes a lot to get that corn to come up. So, yeah, I always think, especially with the pandemic and the possibilities or the opportunities or the challenges, whatever you want to call them, we need to not necessarily reinvent ourselves, but take a new look at how are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why are we doing this?
Well, I couldn't agree more. It's been my contention that the pandemic has accelerated some of the changes that we were slow to make prior to the pandemic. There have been a few innovations in church work and Raceway Ministries work with, for example, live services, streaming, and digital communication, and social media and all those things. It seems like we were kind of playing with that for years, and then the pandemic came along and forced us to try to up the ante a little bit and get good at it. So we were kind of forced to be innovative and creative, and I don't see a lot of that changing. So moving forward, it's not necessarily a matter of totally disposing of everything that we've done in the past in terms of methods even, but we're going to have to really get creative and innovative. How do you think that is going to be able to play out, or how should that play out at the local raceway or the super speedway in terms of ministry as we move forward?
So my thoughts, and I can't call myself an expert, but I think I'm an expert in relationships at the highest level, at the NASCAR level.
Okay.
In other words, my local track, Mr. Clay Campbell, the best thing that we can do is continue to have relationships with those people who are leading at the track.
Yeah.
Because we need to be indispensable to them.
Yes.
If he asked me to pick up trash, I should go pick up trash. If he asked me to go pick up a guy at the airport, I need to be there to serve them, with them understanding I'm an ambassador for Christ first, and then for the Speedway.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, we serve at their pleasure, not ours. So as you have taught me, and Frank Stark and several others who spoke into our lives, you're there to serve them.
I was visiting with Larry Bush the other day on one of our podcasts about his ministry at Berlin. He said the same thing. You need to sit down with the Raceway owner, operator, and find out where their heart is and what they need you to do, and then you engage in that with, in mind, sharing the gospel when and how you can in the midst of serving the folks there at Speedway. I think that's very, very essential. Elaborate on that a little bit more. I understand clearly the concept of being a servant to the Speedway, but how does innovation and creativity play out in the midst of that?
So some of these tracks, we have noticed that a new owner comes in and Raceway Ministries is just irrelevant and not appropriate.
That's a good point.
Therefore, I've got to find a way to make myself relevant to that guy. And you know what? The first thing is prayer.
Sure.
Lord, give me the connection to them. I remember one of the very, very first times that I got connected was, and you remember Mike Smith, who was the PR guy at Martinsville.
I do.
His wife was dying with cancer, and I was asked to show up at his house during a most difficult time.
Wow.
Show up when people are hurting. Love on them when people are hurting, and then they'll want you there when they're celebrating.
That's exactly right.
And that's what I think innovative is.
Okay.
I can create all kinds of cool logos and hype and that kind of stuff, concerts, but creativity, I think, begins at the ground level. It may move to 2,000 feet or 2 miles up, but it has to begin with find a way to connect.
Well, Michael, I think that might be the most important point that we've made in this entire discussion. Creativity and innovation may keep us up with the times in terms of some of the methods of communicating and ways that we do things, but there are some things at the ground level that we never need to get away from, and it has to do with those relationships and serving and being there when needed. To me, that seems to be something that comes through very loudly through your service there at the Community Fellowship. Contemporary worship, lots of innovative ways of doing things, but the bottom line is to be the hands and the feet and the mouth of Christ to go to people that are hurting and minister to them at their point of need. What do you think are going to be the keys to making that happen, particularly coming out of 2020 into 2021? I know Raceway owners and presidents of the different speedways are having to grapple with what happened last year and what's going to happen this year. A lot of that is unknown as to whether or not COVID's going to take a step backwards or whether it's going to have another spike. How many fans are we going to be able to have at the Speedway, if we're able to have any at all? Is racing going to take place again this year? Maybe we're going to have to make adjustments and do it differently like we did last year. So what are going to be the keys from a Raceway Ministries perspective to stepping into 2021 with the racing community and making sure ministry happens? I
always, as I've already said, believe it's a relationship.
Okay.
Find yourself being indispensable to them. But so one of the guys that I follow and love the most is at the Dream Center in Los Angeles, California. We've started a Dream Center here, but he says, which his father said before him, Matthew Barnett, whoever shows up most in someone's life wins the battle of influence.
Okay.
Keep showing up. Not keep showing up and being a pain in the butt. Keep showing up and being that guy that's always there when something needs to be done.
Exactly.
Just be the servant. And I really believe in church life, whoever shows up most does win the battle of influence. So I want to be there when, somebody's hungry or somebody needs some clothes, because when their grandma dies, that preacher over there, he loved us.
Mm-hmm.
Those people over there cared for us. And that's where I find really relevance and creativity begins at somebody's need.
Sure.
And ends when I step on their right.
Yes.
And I can talk about racism.
Go ahead.
Okay. We live in southwestern Virginia, and, there's roots of racism here. And
sure.
I was in a meeting that was paid for by some highfalutin organization, and they were talking about racism, and they had done a phone poll here in our community, and they called this lady, they told the story, And they said, tell us about racism in your community. This older lady, I'm guessing she was in her 90s, she said, I've lived here 95 years, and I've never been to a race. My point is, racing, it's all in the perspective of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
You need to look at the person for who they are, not for their love for one driver or another. Look at them as a human.
Yeah.
And some people just they don't see black or white. Some people just don't see a need for racing. That guy back in that traditional church told me that I was going to hell because I did ministry on Sunday at the race.
Oh.
Don't hear that as much anymore, Dr. Marsh.
Yeah, that's
right?
true. That's true.
But I remember that guy looking at me in the eye when I started this. But again, I really do believe that you need to make yourself be relevant by just meeting needs and showing up in people's lives.
Yeah, I think so for sure. Well, I think a lot of folks involved in Raceway Ministries work through the years have understood that, and they've done their best in the midst of all the different means and methods, whether it's a music concert or handing out chocolate chip cookies or standing there at the gate handing out gospel tracts to people or whatever. I think for the most part, a lot of people understand that perspective, but I think somehow we have to deepen our commitment to that perspective. We need to make sure that that's an anchor that really holds us to the rock, the foundation of ministry. And then all the other things are, I guess, additional to the basics of meeting people's needs. And what better place to do that than at a raceway? It's been my observation that some guy can come to the raceway and he can have a Chase Briscoe or a whatever jacket or hat on, and some guys come to the raceway and they play Mr. Tough or Mr. Wild or whatever they want to be out there in the campground, but at the deepest parts of their heart, they're a human being, and they have deep-seated needs, and the gospel can address those needs. So we need to look through those things. Great point. I appreciate you elaborating on that so very much.
Let me give you two stories.
Okay.
Several years ago, one of the ladies at the Speedway, who was sister to the track owner at the time, pulled me aside. We had lunch, and they said, hey, why don't you guys take over this ADA kart stuff? And so we did. Since that time, I've had an opportunity to be on karts with all different kinds of people. And typically, I find myself in a smaller cart doing special things for the Speedway, like taking care of people who have health issues.
Yeah.
Or moving a prestige to a certain point at a certain time. And I remember taking this older gentleman way out in the middle of where he parked his car, had no clue where he was in life, and just having a Jesus conversation. And this guy, we ended up at a Lexus or a Mercedes or whatever that car was, and he had to be extremely wealthy. But I got to meet him at his need.
Wow.
He handed me this coin on a piece of leather that said, hey, just put that in your pocket, and you see that, remember me and pray for me. It's in the top drawer of my dresser, and I pray for that older gentleman. It's been several years. And then I remember picking up this lady at the fan care, our hospital, and taking her to her car and realizing that car probably wouldn't make it out of the parking lot, let alone to her house. But I had an opportunity to speak to her where she was. When she had fallen, I think, hurt her ankle. Probably, as Dean Kurtz would say, she was over-beveraged. But again, we connected. And those are just connect. Just one of our ladies from our church that serves with us at the Speedway, she irritates me to death because she cannot shut up. But she's the number one person to talk to those guys that are trying to get the signatures of drivers. Okay. And she connects with them for Jesus. Yeah. Because she loves to talk to people, but she always knows it's about, again, connect.
Well, I think that's the bottom line. And, many times at the Raceway, particularly in relationship to the staff at the Speedway, we're able to develop some long-term relationships with those people and minister to needs when a death in the family occurs or someone's needed to officiate a wedding or something like that. But out there at the Speedway and the campground particularly, with the fans, it's a matter of making a connection, and you never know how long you're going to have to make that connection, and you need to make the most of the even brief opportunity that you have whenever God brings it that way.
And we have loved the fact that these people come back over and over and over and over again. Some of them you get one time. Yeah. Some of them you get 50 times through the 25 years.
Well, and that way you get to develop some relationships that turn into friendships and maybe even long-term fellowship with people who come to know Christ.
So there's this family from West Virginia that I did their wedding, and then I did a family funeral because we spread ashes at the track. Again, I got to be their pastor. I have no clue where they live in West Virginia, but I did connect them to a church. Just do that. Just be there when they show up.
Well, those are the timeless means and methods that God has given to us over the years in Raceway Ministries work. And no matter how innovative you become, it always comes back to connecting with people where they are. And I would say that as we move forward in Raceway Ministries work, that's going to need to be the foundation of what we do, in spite of all the other additional glitter and everything else that we might add to it. Now, Michael, as we move into 2021, one thing is, I think, very certain. We have no idea what it's going to look like. We have no idea what the pandemic is going to do at this point. We have no idea what racing is going to look like and what ministry at the Speedway to the fans is going to look like. What are going to be the keys from your perspective to getting a grip on moving into 2021 with it being that open-ended?
So the 11th commandment, blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be broken.
Yes, I recall.
Stay flexible.
Yeah.
When they tell you can't tell the gospel or share the gospel or hand out that tract, don't bash them. Turn around and watch. God will open another door.
Yes.
Because I remember that day that I got a phone call, come to the office. These are not happy days. You remember that?
Oh, I've had a few of those, yes.
And they said, those 15,000 tracks we just bought, you can't use them. And by the way, we had them printed. They had our logo on them. But because one sponsor's logo was on it and not another sponsor, it's on a car. You can't do this. Again, with grace, I'm sorry, forgive us. Man, we want to do better. So just be flexible and continue to walk through the door that they allow you to walk through. Don't be a pain, be a blessing.
Well, I think you're exactly right. If you turn into a thorn in their flesh instead of being a blessing to them, you might forfeit your entire opportunity to even be there.
And we've watched ministries fold because of that.
We sure have.
Right?
Unfortunately, we've lost some of our ministries at some of our major NASCAR venues simply because of that very thing. And I think that's a matter of just making sure that you have the perspective of a servant and realize that this is a great opportunity that God has given, and we need to be faithful stewards to make the most of it, but also do everything we can to guard the opportunity and make sure we don't foolishly jeopardize things. So, well, Michael, wow, time's flown here today with this conversation and all the great insights that come out of your life and that you have shared with us here today because of the experiences that God has given you throughout your years of ministry, not only in church work but in Raceway Ministries work. I would have to say I'm just deeply appreciative of your time and all the thoughts that you've shared. And hopefully as time goes by, we'll have more opportunities to sit down and present to our listeners some other things that God has taught you.
Can I give you two things that I really believe are very important, Roger, and I'm going to do it really quick.
Yeah, in fact,
First
I was going to ask you about
things.
Closing thoughts or comments, so fire away.
These are them. When somebody asks you to pray, stop and pray.
Yeah, good.
Because we Christians are the best ones to say, I'll pray for you. And then we may have a good motive, but we forget.
Yeah.
Secondly, when God puts a resource in your hand that makes a difference in your life, give it away.
Yeah.
Chaco Springs, Alabama.
Yeah.
I handed you a book.
You did.
And that book revolutionized my life in 2006.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've given it away many, many times. In fact, I'm meeting with a guy named Morgan Clow.
Yeah. Yeah, I know
you
Morgan.
Know that name?
Yeah.
Because I gave Morgan that book about 2 years after I gave it to you.
Wow.
And God's used him. It's just give away what God has given you. Stop and pray for those who ask you to pray.
Well, you're exactly right. Yeah. I will never forget when you gave me that book in a pit with a lion on a snowy day. And
Mark Patterson.
That book sat on my shelf for a few months, and then one day I had a flight to some speedway for a meeting or something. I took that book with me, and it literally got me off a dead center and set my soul on fire to do what God had called me to do in Raceway Ministries work.
Praise the Lord.
And I would have to tell you, one of the things that I do pretty consistently is stop by used bookstores and scour their shelves for paperback copies of that book, and I usually keep 2 or 3 in my church office. And over at the Cowboy Church, church in recent years, I can't tell you how many of them I've given away to people that were struggling to find God's direction. So you're exactly right. Whenever you find a source, give it away and just wait and watch and see what God does. It's a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Well,
Thank
listen,
you, Roger.
yeah, thank you, Michael. Man, I appreciate you and the great encouragement that you are, all that God has opened up for you to do. And I appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast with us here today. If you're down here in Texas anytime soon, I would happily take you to Hard 8 Barbecue for another plate of ribs and brisket. In fact, I know we're going to Nashville for a meeting in the month of January here in just a few weeks. And I even looked online last night for a Hard 8 Barbecue restaurant in Nashville, and unfortunately there's not one. But when we get to Nashville, as we have an opportunity, I'd love to take you out for a plate of barbecue.
Amen. I'm looking forward to it, Roger.
All right. Good deal. Well, listen, we've been talking here with Michael Harrison today. Michael has been faithfully involved in serving the Lord in the local church, currently pastoring the Community Fellowship in Collinsville, Virginia, and also serves on the board of directors of the National Fellowship of Raceway Ministries. Faithful servant in Raceway Ministries at the Martinsville Speedway. And Michael, man, deeply appreciate you. I pray that God's best will come to you and Julie and your family in the year to come.
Thank you, sir. Honored to be here. Dr. Marsh, you and Marsha are on my mind, on my prayers today.
Well, I appreciate that so much. Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to the next time we have an opportunity to talk to you. Meanwhile, I want to say a word of thanks to our listeners for tuning in for our podcast today, and we'll look forward to the next episode. But thank you to Michael Harrison. Well, thanks so much for tuning in for today's podcast. We'll look forward to having you join us for the next edition of Raceway Ministries Today.